Hi everyone. In this video, I want to talk about a part of narcissistic relationships that doesn't get discussed very often, and that is abandonment. Most people assume that narcissistic individuals are emotionally cold, independent, and unaffected by separation. Because of that, there is a common belief that narcissists do not experience abandonment fear in the same way other people do. But that assumption is not accurate. People with narcissistic personality styles often struggle with healthy emotional attachment, but that does not mean they are immune to the experience of abandonment. In fact, for many narcissistic individuals, separation, even temporary separation, can be one of the most psychologically destabilizing experiences they face. For many narcissistic individuals, control is not about superiority. Control is about safety. When they feel in control of the relationship, their internal anxiety is quieter. When that control is threatened, distress rises very quickly, and nothing threatens control more than the possibility of abandonment. One of the biggest misconceptions about narcissistic relationships is the idea that narcissists are always the ones who leave. In reality, many people eventually leave narcissistic relationships themselves, especially as awareness of emotional abuse and manipulation increases. When you leave a narcissistic relationship, it is not experienced as a simple breakup. Several things happen all at once. The narcissist loses control of the narrative. They lose access to validation and narcissistic supply. And very often they lose practical benefits tied to the relationship. This combination can feel psychologically catastrophic. That is why the reactions can be extreme: rage, mockery, sudden indifference, or attempts to discredit you. The confusion comes from how abandonment fear presents itself. We tend to associate abandonment with desperation, clinging, or visible emotional distress. But in narcissistic personalities, abandonment fear rarely looks like that. Instead, it often shows up as anger, contempt, emotional withdrawal, or an increased need for control. So rather than seeing vulnerability, we see aggression or indifference. To understand this better, it helps to look at the narcissistic relationship cycle. Most of these relationships follow a fairly predictable pattern. They begin with idealization, intense attention, emotional intensity, and a sense that the relationship is special or exceptional. Over time, that phase gives way to devaluation. Criticism increases, emotional distance grows. The other partner often begins to feel insecure, confused, or off balance. Then comes discarding, or at least the threat of it. And finally, hoovering, attempts to pull the other person back through promises, emotional appeals, or sudden warmth. From the outside, this cycle can look like power and control, and in many ways it is. But psychologically, this cycle is less about dominance and more about anxiety regulation. What is important to understand is that these reactions are not signs of strength. They are signs of poor tolerance for loss of control. In narcissism, abandonment fear rarely shows up as sadness or grief. It is far more likely to show up as attack. Abandonment fear does not only appear during permanent breakups, it often shows up during temporary separations, work trips, family visits, or even just a few days apart. Many people in narcissistic relationships notice a pattern. As the separation approaches, tension increases. Arguments escalate over small issues. The relationship suddenly feels more fragile. This is not coincidental. For individuals with narcissistic personality traits, separation is often experienced at a very primitive emotional level. It is not processed as "we will reconnect soon." It is felt as emotional destabilization. Because there are limited tools for healthy emotional regulation, that anxiety turns into anger, blame, or sabotage of closeness. Interestingly, the same pattern often appears after the separation ends. Instead of warmth or relief, there may be emotional distance, irritability, or subtle hostility. This is confusing for many partners because logically the separation was temporary, but emotionally it activated a deep abandonment response. At an unconscious level, there is often anger, not always expressed directly but present nonetheless, a feeling of "how could you leave me?" These reactions are closely tied to insecure attachment styles, including anxious, avoidant, or disorganized attachment. For people with these patterns, separation is rarely neutral, even when it is short. This raises an important question. If abandonment is so threatening, why do narcissists sometimes leave first? The answer is that leaving can feel like controlling the fear. When someone fears being abandoned, abandoning first removes surprise. It avoids vulnerability. It allows the person to stay in control of the narrative. I leave you before you can leave me. But this creates a paradox. After leaving, many narcissists attempt to pull the person back. Push-pull dynamics emerge. Distance followed by pursuit. This is where hoovering fits into the picture. The pattern becomes go away, come back, push away, pull closer. In long-term relationships, abandonment fear often shows up as repeated threats. Threats of divorce, threats of leaving, threats that are rarely followed through. These threats serve a function. They keep the other person anxious and compliant. As long as the narcissistic individual controls the possibility of separation, they feel psychologically safer. But something interesting happens when the other partner finally says, "Okay, let's end this." Suddenly the tone changes. Repair becomes possible. Promises appear. The reason is simple. Control has shifted. As long as they are the one threatening to leave, they feel safe. When the other person takes that power, abandonment fear is activated. Narcissistic individuals are not emotionless. They are emotionally dysregulated. Fear of abandonment, fear of shame, and fear of losing control exist beneath the surface of these relationships. Without deep therapeutic work and genuine self-awareness, these patterns tend to repeat. If this resonates with your experience, it is important to understand that these dynamics are not a reflection of your worth. They are expressions of unresolved psychological vulnerability.